Hello, everyone. Welcome to Subtle Asian Book Club. We're super excited to talk about Jade Legacy. I'm Alexandra from Twirling Pages, and my co-host is
Tiffany. I read by Tiffany, and we're joined by the wonderful, amazing author.
I'm Fonda Lee. Hi, everyone. It's great to be back on the show.
We're super excited. This is the second time Fonda is back. We read Jade City as I think our March 2021 book of the month. So almost the full year, which is crazy to think about. We love the series, which is why Fonda's back. So many members highly requested this book. So just to kick things off really quickly, we wanted to just have you introduce yourself and your books. And as like a fun little question from our last interview, you mentioned you really like anime and manga. We were curious what you're currently watching, any shows we should be watching as well.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Fonda Lee. I'm the author of the Greenbone Saga, which starts with Jade City and then continues in Jade War, and just finished up with the trilogy ending book, Jade Legacy, which came out at the end of November of last year. And I am also the author of a few science fiction novels. And as for what I have been watching lately, on the anime front, I am slowly making my way through Code GS, and I'm super excited. I haven't started yet, but for the final half season ender of Attack on Titan, I'm so excited for it. So that's what I've been watching, and then also just. I have been sucked into Ted Lasso, even though sitcoms are absolutely not my thing. Enough people told me that I had to watch it that I got into it.
Ooh, that sounds so fun and so emotional too. I mean, Attack on Titans.
Yes.
In April, I don't know if it's on your radar, but you should watch this show. It's called Spy X Family or Spy Family.
Oh.
It's going to be really good. I'm like very excited for it.
Okay. I'm gonna have to look it up. I'll add it. Now that I'm done Jade Legacy, I actually can watch television. So I'm making my list. Okay.
And speaking of, we'll transition into some of our questions that we prepared in advance. How does it feel to be done with the whole entire Greenbone saga? What will you miss the most about this world? Do you have any lasting words of wisdom or advice or messages for your fans who are really sad to part from the characters?
It feels great, honestly. There's a huge amount of relief and satisfaction having it out in the world. As you know, writing a big epic fantasy series is a long-term commitment, and a lot of authors have a hard time wrapping it up. And so it was my big pandemic project was finishing Jade Legacy. So it's hugely satisfying. It is also sad. It's hard for me to leave a world that I've spent so much time in and characters that I've spent so much time with. And I feel still kind of hungover. I mean, honestly, I finished writing the book like a year ago, and there's still days I wake up and I'm like, oh, I'm not writing it anymore. It's a very strange feeling. And transitioning to writing new stuff has been interesting because there's so many things that I've gotten used to. For example, combat with Jade disciplines. I found myself writing a scene the other day where I said, oh wait, no, they don't have any deflection, any perception. They don't have any of this. So it's been great, but also it's been a bit of an adjustment.
When you said that you were slightly hungover from the series ending, I was like, you're hungover. We're all hungover. Everyone's like, Fonda, please pay for our therapy bills. But we're really excited to see the series wrap up. But like, as you said, very sad to see everything come to an end. Would you ever want to create like a Greenbone Saga cinematic universe and just keep writing this type of?
Oh gosh, it's tempting, right? And I know that there have been people have said, like, are you tempted to turn the third book into 2 books and make it a tetralogy? Would you want to do a spin-off series? Because oftentimes when a series gains traction, there is that temptation to just keep going and milk it for as far as it can go. But that was never my vision with the series. I'm a very firm believer in not just starting the sort of story well, but ending it well. I think it's much easier once something gains some support to keep wanting to keep putting out more material, and I would much rather leave readers wanting more than to overstay my welcome. I had a story that I wanted to tell, and I told it. And the wonderful thing about books is that they're eternal, and readers can always go back to Janloon. They can always reread the books. They can use it as a jumping off point for their own creativity with art and fan fiction. And so I'm happy with where it ended, and I'm honestly just really thankful and grateful that readers came along with me for the journey and loved these characters so much.
So something we're really curious about is, how is the experience writing Jade Legacy different from writing Jade City versus Jade War? Especially since Jade City came out, I just looked it up. It was like 2017, which feels pretty far from now, but also not that far in terms of the span of a book's life or a trilogy's life.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It feels like a different era. And yet when I look back at it, I'm like, it wasn't actually that long ago. It was quite different because honestly, each of the books in this trilogy were different in terms of the writing process because they were different books. So Jade City was a more tight and contained clan versus clan story set in the city of Janloon. And so I wrote it in a fairly straightforward manner from, page 1 through to the end of that book. I mean, I make it sound easier than it was. Of course, there was a lot of revision, a lot of work along that path, but it was pretty straightforward. Jade War expanded the world, and I had an entire thread of that narrative was set in Espenia with Andon and his journey there. And so I found I couldn't write it linearly the way that I did with Jade City. I had to write many chapters in one location with Andon's point of view, and then go back to Janloon and write more, and then figure out how to stitch them together narratively. And Jade Legacy was another layer on top of that because of the much more expanded time frame that I was working with. So it was such a large thing to keep in my mind at one time that I had to break it down into pieces. So the writing process was different in that I almost thought of it as multiple stories. And I even thought of it as multiple seasons of a television show that when put together create one series. So in a way, Jade Legacy by itself was a multi-book project, even though, it all came together as one book. I had to find these breaking points where I would work on this era of the story and get it into decent shape before I could move on to the next era of the story. So it was, and this is the case with books all the time, is that you kind of have to wrap your process around sort of the nature of the book and what the demands of that narrative are.
Yeah, no, I truly felt that when I was reading it. It did feel like a series, like a cinematic TV show or something, because as I was reading it, I was like, so much is going on. There are so many storylines going on, and plus it spans over 30 years or something, so it feels like you experience so much. So Jade Legacy on its own really does feel like a journey, and then thinking back to how it started, it's just oh my gosh, I've been through so much with these characters.
Yeah, when Hilo makes those jokes about him being old and a dad, I was like, wow, I feel you.
Yeah. Some new things that were introduced into Jade Legacy was this storyline about cinema. So we're introduced to Danny Sinto and some other characters and some other ventures that Wen is trying to improve the economic growth. What inspired you to introduce Hong Kong cinema? Was it inspired by your personal interest in Hong Kong cinema? That how did it flourish?
Well, honestly, what got me into martial arts was cinema. And now I'm going to make myself sound really old, but there was a big craze over karate and kung fu in the 70s and 80s. And it was really due to the popularization of martial arts on the big screen that drew me into studying martial arts. And I'm that lasted for decades. And so when I was thinking about, well, how does the world change in the Greenbone saga, and how does the clan change and grow its influence globally? Obviously, in pop culture and media was something that like sprang to the forefront of my mind. It's hard to overstate the impact of actually one man in particular, Bruce Lee, right? He absolutely blew open the doors on Asian cinema and Hong Kong martial arts, and just like brought it to the West, really. And that was sort of the kernel for me of introducing that storyline in the Greenbone saga. Was, yes, like Jade was once exclusive to the Kekanese, and in Jade City and Jade War, we start to see, that culture opening up and interacting with the rest of the world. And there's trade and modernization and all this international stuff going on. And imagine, Jade as depicted on movie screens and on movie stars and being shown in theaters in Port Massey. Like, of course, that stuff would happen. And so that was this whole element. I always wanted this saga to feel very true to life. And Jade isn't just this magic substance that lets the characters do cool feats in the battle scenes. It's like an actual resource that would touch all these different facets in society. And also, it was just really fun to have Wen go to like the John Moon Film Festival and be like signing movie stars, and like and honestly, it fit really well with her character arc, because Wen has always been the soft power of the clan, and she's thinking about all the different ways that she can advantage the clan beyond just the traditional Greenbone like hard power of warriors, right? So Wen rising to that position and doing things like influencing the pop culture landscape and media and entertainment, just it worked out really well for that story.
Yeah, I really like how you describe it. Well, it is soft power, but I really like the inclusion of it, since everything else is so jade and knives and talon knives. Do you have a favorite piece of Hong Kong cinema, or like a favorite movie?
Oh gosh, that's hard. There's a lot, but I love Infernal Affairs. That's one of my favorite movies.
Yes, I'm a big fan. I took like an East Asian cinema class like 2 semesters ago, and there was this whole section on like martial arts, and so we watched like 5 or 6 martial arts film, and sometimes some of the scenes when I was reading Jade Legacy, that's kind of how I imagined, and I was just like, this is perfect. And then plus the introduction of like cinema in the world made it really feel more real and grounded, because in comparison we have Jade, which can be hard to like conceptualize sometimes, but yeah, it was perfect in my opinion.
And also I love the idea of like meta narratives in fiction. So I'm writing a story about this world and these characters, and they are telling the story like within the story, with black and green, and like the movies with green bones and their feats. And then I have a scene where Jaya and her friends are talking about the movie and like dissecting it from like a green bones point of view as to what was realistic and what wasn't realistic. So I love those little layers that make it feel more real.
Yeah, so much fun to read about. Let's dive into plot and characters, which I'm sure everyone is curious about. So if you haven't finished the book yet, I don't know what you're doing, but you need to finish the book, because we're going in straight for the spoilers. Did you know the ending of the book and the fate of each character when writing Jade City? I know this is a question we can just dive like all over the place, because there's so many characters, even side characters we're deeply invested in. But I know 2 characters people are especially curious about were obviously Hilo, or we'll say 3. Hilo, and then Barrow and Miktar were the ones that our book club members were like, I need to know.
Yeah, I knew a lot of the fates of the characters. I wouldn't say in Jade City, because when I was writing Jade City, I didn't know whether I would get to write Jade War and Jade Legacy. So I wrote Jade City without the knowledge that it would be a trilogy. And I had vague ideas of where I would take the story. And then once I sat down to write Jade War, I really, at that point, pretty much knew the fate of most of the main characters. And I will say, though, that even though I knew a lot of the end points for these characters, I didn't know how they would get there. So, for example, I felt really strongly that, you know, the arc of this trilogy is this generation of the Cull family. And so I always knew that the end of Jade Legacy would involve the handing off of power from Hilo to the next pillar of No Peak. And I knew pretty early on that Hilo would die at the end of Jade Legacy, but I didn't know how yet, right? So it took me the outlining and the writing process to put it all together, to figure out what would happen at the end. And another example would be Tar. After Ken dies in Jade War, I knew that Tar would have some sort of huge mental breakdown. And, you know, given his role in the clan and his what Hilo sends him out to do and the type of person that he becomes, he's a guy who lives in such brutality and darkness, and he's lost Ken. I knew that would have these repercussions and that Tar would break down in some way. But I didn't know that he would be exiled to Espenia and how he would come back into the clan and what role he would play before his death. And those were, so I it's like going on a trip and knowing that you are going to end here in this city, but you don't necessarily know the path that you're going to take to get there. Barrow was the other character that readers ask me a lot about. And I did not know his fate at all in Jade City. In fact, when I was writing Jade City, I thought that he was going to, well, first I thought he was going to die like just early on, like a minor George R. R. Martin character. Then I envisioned him as like a framing device. Like I figured Barrow would last until the end of Jade City and then die at the end of Jade City. When he survived until the end of Jade City, then I knew he was surviving the whole trilogy. And I, at different points, thought, well, I knew he would make it to the end of Jade Legacy. I still didn't even know if he was going to be alive or dead at the end of Jade Legacy. But as kind of things continued, I felt I knew that he would most likely make it. And then I had all this pressure from readers to kill him. Like they would overtly ask me to kill him. So there was a lot of reader pressure, and I'm really glad with where he ended up and with sticking with that sort of initial instinct of mine of what would happen to him.
As a taxi driver.
Yes.
Yeah, I felt like his ending was so ironic compared to, you see so many characters, so many lives, and like where they end up, and then Barrow's just felt like so perfect for how he ended, even though, yes, at some point I was like, Barrow, get rid of him.
Yeah. For me, the important question isn't whether the character lives or dies. The important question is there narrative ending resonant in some way? Does it evoke something new? Like, does it feel beautiful and poetic? Even if it's a terrible, tragic ending or it's a triumphant one, like regardless of whether they're alive or dead, does it feel right? And I know that seems very sort of like a vague answer, but that honestly is how it is when I'm writing them. It's like, God, does this feel like the right ending for them, regardless of whether they're alive or not?
No, I personally, when I was reading it for all the characters, I definitely felt that regardless of where they died, if they died. So yes. I specifically think of like Make Tar in that scene where Andon visits him, and he sees like the photos of like Drya and Niko and like how the kids are doing, and then he, like right before the end, he kind of tells Andon, he's like, hey, like just remind the kids like your uncle like still really loves you. And I got so emotional during that scene, and then
that was
I was taking sorry, you go.
No, some of those scenes were hard. They were hard to write because they are, and like Tar, I think, is a character that probably not a lot of readers felt that invested in the first 2 books, but he is so important to this story. He's vital to Hilo. He's Hilo's right-hand man, and he's given so much to the clan. And he's also done terrible things, but he's also just such his character is so loyal and connected. So that's what I'm trying to do, is like find the angle with each of these characters that pulls something more out of them.
Definitely. I think the scene with Tar when Hilo was gonna kill him in, I think, their backyard, but then Wen comes over afterwards. He's like, "Oh, did you finish it? Is my brother dead?" I was like, everything hurts, Fonda. But of course, everything, like, as much as it hurt, I think it ended in the most perfect way possible. Everyone who needed to die died, unfortunately. Was there much that changed from, like, how much has changed since you originally planned the book, in a sense where was there any character that you imagined in one direction that completely shifted, or maybe their character arc was different than you had originally planned?
Yeah. Things shifted, but there weren't any, I wouldn't say there was any character other than Barrow. I will say Barrow surprised me on multiple occasions. But there wasn't anything where I like wrote something completely different as an ending for that character, and then completely like threw it out and did something different. So I do feel like all the characters ended up where I envisioned them in some way or another. Although I'd say with the secondary characters, some of them were surprising. So like, for example, I didn't know that Gaunt Ash would die at the end of Jade City until I got there. And so the secondary characters are more unpredictable in terms of, sometime where they end up. And that's because they are, they're kind of part of this much larger mosaic. And like the main characters, I've kind of got a bit of handle on them and like the engine driving, but oftentimes the secondary characters are more of a surprise.
Yeah. Transitioning a little bit away from like the ending and more into like relationships and how those intertwine. The end of Jade War leaves with Hilo and Wen's relationship at an incredibly rocky place. Did you always envision Wen as the pillarman when writing the hard parts of the relationship to showcase the highs and the lows?
I did know that Wen would become the pillarman. I left after Jade War, like you said, they're in a really rough spot, but for me, the strength of their relationship was always going to be one of the bright spots of this saga. There's a lot of tragedy in this story, but at the end of the day, the strength of Hilo and Wen as a couple was something that was very important to me, and that I knew was going to be kind of a hallmark of this story. So I knew that like they were going to go through this really dark and difficult period, and that Wen would rise out of that stronger than before, and would have this even greater influence and power in the clan. So the tricky part was navigating that process, because they end Jade War in such a bad place, and I knew that they were going to get to a much better place in Jade Legacy, but it had to be earned. So I couldn't just have them reconcile too quickly. That would feel really inauthentic and false. I also couldn't have them fall apart and absolutely be unable to reconcile and have it feel inauthentic, because everyone is now like, how could these people get back together? They hate each other, nothing's working. So there was this fine line that I was walking down, writing their relationship. And that first quarter of the novel was the hardest for me to write, and not because of the plot, but because of the nuance of the relationships. In that first quarter of the book, you have Wen and Hilo, and the difficulty in their relationship. You also have Shay and Woon, and so there were multiple emotional journeys that I was juggling, plus the whole plot, right? all the actual plot motions that were going on. I rewrote that first quarter of the book a few times, and until I felt like Wen and Hilo's interactions felt as real and authentic, and the way that they come to a reconciliation felt correct as well. And also, like once she becomes Pillarman, it's not like everything is hunky-dory, right? There's still like some areas of friction between them, and they still have to learn to trust each other. And I've also, on top of that, there was also Shay and Hilo's relationship in that first quarter of the book as well, and how they start off on terrible footing after Jade War and have to rebuild their partnership. So yeah, just so much in that that first section of Jade Legacy.
I'm kind of dying a little bit at one of the comments, which is the call boys are a little too comfortable with Divine Lilac. But yes, you do such a great job of writing these relationships, especially with how fraught Wen and Hilos are in the beginning. It's like you want to put Hilo into a chokehold for just like going to Divine Lilac, committing adultery, but then you see his thought process and you're like, I'm not condoning this, but like I understand why people are doing certain things, even though slap.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting to see people's reactions during, to that first section where Hilo's going to the Lilac Divine and their relationship is on the rocks, because so many stories would be like, oh, there was infidelity, okay, well, they're doomed, like that's the end, right? Like that wasn't, but I wanted to showcase them kind of like at their worst, like hitting rock bottom and then building back up. And also the different types of betrayal that happen between a couple, right? And in Hilo's mind, yes, he's going to the Lilac Divine, but in his mind, Wen has betrayed him to the worst possible way by like hiding all of her activities, and putting herself in danger, almost getting herself killed and leaving their children without a mother and keeping these secrets from him, from her pillar for all these years. So I needed a way to showcase his pain, and how and why he would feel the way that he does, and also how she's struggling to try and rebuild her marriage while also dealing with traumatic brain injury. So it was a lot to deal with. I mean, these characters, they go through a lot. I know that's my fault. Well aware of that.
Well,
wow. Wait, sorry. I just read one of the comments and I feel like this is a really good point about like the difference between Wen and Hilo and their parenting styles, and how like Hilo is often seen as like the harsher person in general, but then Wen as a parent is a little bit stricter. Talk about that.
Yeah.
slash Niko.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you think about like who they are as people, right? What I try to do is always write the characters as true to who I think they are as people, and their expectations of themselves. And like remember that like Hilo has he has always been a family man. Like that is who he is, right? Like that's, I mean, for all the things that he does, like he's very devoted to his family as a brother and as a husband, as a father. And Wen, I find it interesting that people think Wen is harsher on the kids, but I can see where that's coming from, but also she is very invested in them because she's well aware that like that's kind of part of her responsibility in the clan, is to like raise the next generation of the Call family. And she is especially like her view of Niko. One is like she is as much, people talk a lot about Hilo in what he does in chapter 21 of Jade War, right? But like Wen 100% enables him, and she is very much she feels very much that like she brought Niko back to KCON to as the heir of the clan, because Rue is not the heir of the clan. So like that has a huge bearing on how she sees her sons and treats her sons. And I think it's, you even get her own point of view, right? Like that she is, she's very, I think that maybe some people would think, oh, she's like a really harsh mom. She's not a loving mom, but she is a very loving mom. She really does love her kids, but she's an Asian mom too. Like she has really high expectations of them, and she also presses some of her own insecurities and her own fears upon them as well.
100% yes. That's all I have to say.
So our next question is a bit long-winded, so I'm reading off of this, but Rues' death was one of the most surprising because, one, he's a stone eye, which makes us believe that he's safer and not at the forefront of danger, and two, it was an accident. Can you talk a bit about why you chose Rue to die without glory or honor, and how that shapes Hilo's perspective on what it means to be a Greenbone?
Yeah, I knew Rue would die from a very young age. Well, I mean, when he was in Jade War, I knew he would die in Jade Legacy, which is hard. It makes it hard to write all the scenes with him because I like know where he's going to end up. But there are costs to this incredibly violent honor culture that these characters live in. And these characters swim in this culture, right? We see so many battles, and we see duels, and we see fights in which they're hurt or they die for their clan, for the family, for honor, and but they also have like this whole like all these expectations that are placed on Greenbones also fall on Rue, and even though he doesn't have the same powers that the rest of his family has. So I wanted to I guess show that that this isn't just a story where you can forget about the repercussions of the kind of life that these people lead, because there's just so much awful unnecessary death, right? And it's in a way very it resonates and is a callback to how Lon died in Jade City. Right? That like they have this whole culture of you die for the clan, and you're a warrior, and your martial prowess is so important, and that leads Rue to make decisions that ultimately end up with him dying in a accidental, meaningless way. And that is the catalyst, I think, that it moves Hilo in a different direction too. Because one of the big themes of this whole series is how the clans change over time, and how this culture kind of also is impacted by outside forces, but also like just time and changing cultural expectations. And the clans are not, they're very traditional, but they are not exempt from, all the changing society and changing culture. And Hilo and the No Peak clan starting to be part of that change is largely due to it touching them personally and understanding, like, gosh, like, this is the consequence of the way we live.
Ooh. Yes, 100%. But when you were speaking about how like outside forces affects the clan and how their traditional traditions kind of reminds me of the next question. So I'm going to just segue right into it, which is Santo's Operation Firebreak drew parallels from the real world government operations, especially when we discuss how innocent civilians are harmed. Why was this important for you to include in the series, which I think you kind of touched earlier?
Yeah. So Cold War politics are very apparent, right, in the Greenbone saga. You've got Igutan and Espenia, and their rivalry is very much a backdrop to the whole story and the reason why these foreign powers are so interested in Jade. And I, have always said that Jade to me in the Greenbone saga isn't just a source of magical powers, it's a resource. It has economic implications. There are political and military implications to it. It's not good or bad. It can be used for good or for bad. And the fact that there is this Cold War backdrop, of course, led me to bring in inspiration from our own world, and in particular, the Cold War foreign policies of America during, the 80s. And you think of like all the places that America got involved in, supporting any anti-communist regimes, sometimes very brutal anti-communist regimes. I wanted that kind of greater political backdrop to say something about Jade as well, right? That of course Jade would end up being used in the sort of realpolitik way. And a lot of my process with the Greenbone saga was always thinking about, okay, what are sort of the third, fourth, fifth order effects of like this speculative element of the magic Jade. And the whole like subplot with Operation Firebreak and Jim Santo's his contract military firms, like that all involved me doing a lot of like research into like Cold War era events, and oh gosh, the amount of rat holes I went down like studying Blackwater. It was really interesting. so yeah, and I think like the fact that the Cold War is called the Cold War doesn't take away from the fact that like a ton of lives were lost in it, right? Like, yes, the US and the USSR did not engage in a hot war. We were not all annihilated in a nuclear disaster and we got through that. However, it doesn't, you can't forget the fact that it didn't become a hot war, but they were constantly at war through proxies. And so like all these conflicts that were happening in the world that involved like the big powers moving stuff, I wanted that to feel very like authentic to this time period and like recognizable to us as being something that is familiar, but is also very different because it's a fantasy world and there's magic Jade.
Yeah, no, I also felt like in Jade Legacy, we went a little bit deeper, and that's why to me Jade Legacy felt the most real or modern, because I feel like in Jade City is definitely more of like a traditional feeling, and then in Jade Legacy it is like definitely more modern. You did mention earlier that you did a bunch of research for the Cold War. Was there any information or like cool fact that you found about the Cold War that you couldn't get to integrate it into Jade Legacy?
Not specific facts. Like I don't usually research for specific facts. I generally research for themes and ideas that I then kind of incorporate or mix and match and find common threads and bring them into the story. So, like I ended up researching things like U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and like the Iran-Contra deal, like just sort of all these things that happened in the Cold War, and I kind of just let that sort of simmer in the back of my mind, and then figured out, okay, well, how does this apply to my story, or like what are sort of common themes that I can bring in here, and like the growth, for example, of private military contractors. And the amount of like government spending that goes towards like PMCs, like those are sorts of things that I incorporate in. And then there are though cool things that I discover or that I go searching for and that get pulled in some way. So not specific to the Cold War, but I was researching jade mining, and ended up going down this whole path of researching alternative ways to mine for diamonds, and like ended up like learning a lot about undersea, like underwater diamond mining. And that, of course, works itself into like these ships that are trawling for jade off the coast of Kekon. And then Andon goes to Espenia, and there's a whole subplot there about the medical growth of jade. And when I knew that was going to be the medical use of jade was going to become a subplot, I looked for real life allegories. And so a lot of his work trying to get medical use of jade legalized in Espenia is inspired by how acupuncture was legalized in the United States.
I saw that. I was like, because one of my family members very into Eastern medicine, and my aunt's an acupuncturist. So I was like, I see these ties of medicine, because I could imagine many years back, like the U.S. or like Western countries just being very anti like Eastern medicine, acupuncture, just all these things. They're like,
exactly
weird.
Yeah. And that whole thing where that the part of that storyline in which they go to, there's this PR firm that goes to the public, and they do like a demo, like Andon goes and does like a demo of jade medicine, and it's met with like all this skepticism, and but there's people lined up outside to get this jade healing. That is basically what happened with acupuncture in the United States.
Wow.
My brain right now is just like, there's so much going on.
So next question that we were curious about is related a bit to, I don't want to say fan theories, but like many people suspected that the ending of Jade Legacy would also conclude with the end of all clans, like the Clanless Future movement winning. Was this ever a possibility that you ever considered, just the clans no longer existing? Or were you like, nah, the clan's going to stay?
No, the clans are going to stay. Yeah, no, it wasn't ever a possible ending for me for a couple of reasons. One, because this is the story of the Cull family, and this and the Greenbones, and I was not going to turn this into the rebellion of the Clanless against the Kekanese government, and like the overthrow of the whole clan system, because that's no fun. I mean, that would be a terrible ending for the protagonists and deeply unsatisfying for me as a writer, and probably for most readers. And then the second reason is I built a world in which Jade and the Greenbone culture was so integral to the country, and it was, this isn't the sort of situation in which a bunch of foreign-backed agitators and rebels are going to like overthrow thousands of years of history and culture. Like, Jade is just so much a part of Kekon, it's so much a part of the clans, that even if the clans won, like let's say they had killed all the clan leaders in that John Loon bombing, right? I mean, obviously would have a very different story. But even if they did that, that would be at best like a temporary victory. In the same way that, like, I mean, there would have been, could clans eventually go away over like the long run, especially if the Clanless had succeeded? Yes, possibly, but it wouldn't have been any sort of short, neat, like, okay, the clans are gone. Like, it wouldn't have happened that way. It's in the same way that like there was a French Revolution that overthrew the monarchy, and then Napoleon rose up. So it's like, that wasn't the story that I was going to tell. It wasn't going to be the long journey of whether or not the rebels succeed against the clans. So there was, I think that like I had, I hope convincingly depicted Kekon as a place that was very much, Jade and clans were baked into its DNA, and for me, it's a more optimistic ending to see that culture and those traditions survive but change, rather than to see them completely annihilated in a way that felt inauthentic, or that would be at best temporary.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's good.
We talked about it a little bit earlier, but the the ending was truly perfect. And now that I think about it, and after finishing the book, I'm like, there's no way that it would be a satisfying ending if the Clanless Future movement won. So yes.
Yeah, I mean,
But
also we're
going
not
a little
attached
bit-
to those characters. Like, who in the
Yeah.
Clanless Future movement do you like? You know, like those aren't the characters that we're following, right? So, like, as a writer, like, who do you want to succeed at the end? So there's that combination of like, you know, what's right for the story, and telling a satisfying story, and then kind of what makes sense in the world. So like, it's a combination of those.
That makes a lot of sense.
Moving kind of back towards the ending where Hilo dies. Wait, sorry.
So some of our book club members were surprised, or at least I, for example, was surprised that Hilos' death wasn't more grand. I think I read it and then I was like, wait, what just happened? Because I think even if we were to predict that Hilo was going to die, I think with his character, you expect it to be like some really big thing, like him going down with the John Loon explosion in what was in the major building. And it was just so surprising that it wasn't something that was more grand. Did you always plan for this like irony of Aitmata surviving until the end and Hilo dying? And then something that Alexandra brought up when we were discussing the book after was it's a bit ironic that even though Aitmata lived and Hilo died, that the No Peak clan really prevailed over the Mountain clan.
Yeah. I knew that Aitmata would live, to see, I guess, the fate of her clan, the repercussions of her actions as well. And I, you know, in many ways, like this is I'm trying to break down, like figure out which part of your question to answer first. So I guess I'll start with Hilos Death. This trilogy was always two things. First and foremost, it was a family saga, and then second, it was a gangster story. And so the family saga aspect was meant that I knew that it would end with Hilo passing on power to the generation afterwards, and his death had to be resonant from the perspective of his family relationships. And so it wasn't, you know, this wasn't going to be like an Avengers style, like giant battle between the Mountain and No Peak in the streets. It wasn't going to be, or even Green Bones versus, you know, mercenaries. Like it's not a superhero story. It's not even an action story, even though it gets marketed as an action story. Sometimes it really is a family story. And so the only right way for Hilo to die was going to be at home, surrounded by his family. And then the second thing was like, you know, for these characters, I mentioned, you know, the second thing that the Greenbone Saga is a gangster story. For them to survive this long, to see their life's work, you know, largely come to fruition and pass on their power is like a triumph in and of itself, right? So I think I always go back to kind of what my inspirations were. Think about like Vito Corleone dies with his grandson in like an orchard of a heart attack, right? Like that is a good death for him. For him to have survived that long, to be playing with his grandson and die of a heart attack is like a poignant but ultimately triumphant death. And like the end of the Godfather series, Michael Corleone just dies of old age. I mean, he's been through so many terrible things in his life. He's done terrible things in his life. And he dies of old age. So for Hilo to make it to, you know, his late 50s and to be on the brink of peace with his son, nephew, you know, taking over the reins is a triumph, and for him to be surrounded by his family. And this is really like there's the contrast between No Peak and the Mountain has been one of like the strong singular leader the strong woman leader in Aitmata versus the team that you have in the Call family. And so Aitmata, she ends the story. She ruled alone, and she ends the story alone. And that is the right ending for her, because she doesn't get the glorious death, right? Like, she sees a lot of the things she worked toward come to pass, but not in the way that she envisioned them. And she's alone. The world has moved past her, right? Like, she was the leader during a period of time in which that kind of leadership was accepted and needed. And, she was a very brutal leader and very effective leader. But oftentimes, the very tyrannical but powerful leaders are the ones that do not do a great job of grooming their successors and seeing a future in which they are not the ones on top. And that describes Aitmata. No one is going to be good enough for her, because she is the smartest and most powerful of them. And she is, any single one of the calls wouldn't be able to defeat her, but it's only because they all work together. So, like, Hilo dies amongst his family, and she is alive, but she is alone. And, like, that felt emotionally resonant to me.
Now, when you talk about, like, everything is piecing together.
Yeah, no, everything feels so, like, perfect and bittersweet and just right. And honestly, just hearing that makes me feel a lot better about the ending, and just makes me feel much more at peace about everything. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Niko, because he is the next generation of the Call family. At one point, Shay mentions that Niko parallels Aitmata the most compared to Shay, Lon, and Hilo. When crafting Niko's character arc, was this something you had in mind, given the future of the No Peak clan and the lack of the Mountain clan rulership?
Yeah, I knew Niko would become the pillar of the No Peak clan at the end, but I didn't know how he was going to get there. And I also knew he was going to get there in a very different way than Lon and Hilo, because he's growing up under different circumstances and with different upbringing. And he's already seen a lot of clan war, and he suffered a lot, like even losing both his parents, his biological parents, like before he can remember them, right? So he's already very cynical, and he's very pragmatic at a young age. And I knew that, like, he would be a character that I actually wanted readers to have a little bit of a ambiguous feeling about Niko at the end, because you don't really know what kind of leader he's going to be yet. You have hints of it. And Andon, certainly kind of gives you an insight into him. But I wanted it to still feel a bit open-ended, because, life's not neat like that. Like, this is the beginning of his reign, and we don't really know where it's going to go. But one of the things that he has in common with Aitmata is, losing his parents at a young age, and having this sort of, I guess, a hard view of the world. And, to have him be the pillar at the end of the story is hopefully, I think, a way of showing that really, like, this is the end of an era, and there is a new era coming. But also, like, Aitmata's clear-eyed vision of the future, and her shrewdness, and her toughness, her her sense of I guess pragmatic vision, are things that don't go away. Like, they're still there, but they're like they're being carried forward in a different person. Like, he's learned from her as the enemy, as well as from but he has, like, his family to back him up. So in a way, it's kind of like, hopefully he's able to be kind of the best of both clans, because now we are in a situation at the end of Jade Legacy where No Peak is the dominant clan, and I don't know what the future holds any more than any of the readers do. But But yeah, like Niko, of course, like the way that he came back to KCON was going to have these ripple effects that that determine him as a character. I think a lot of people imagine something more cliche and dramatic, right? Like I think a lot of people might have imagined, oh, Niko's going to betray the clan and go to the mountain. Like that's kind of the easy answer, I think. And I don't like easy answers as a writer. Like I never go for the easy answer, and it doesn't feel authentic to me either. Like it doesn't make sense. I mean, I even saw theories like, oh, like Niko's going to, destroy the clans or something like that didn't, or like he's going to challenge Hilo to a duel. Like all of those were sort of, I guess, the soap opera answers. But like I wanted him to be kind of an understandable character in his own right and go through his own journey where he's trying to reconcile these things that have happened to him in his life and sort of all the bloodshed that he's inherited, but also like the love of his family, and his loyalty to them and his relationship to his brother who dies in such like this meaningless way when he's not there, and the expectations of his mother, of his father, being kind of like this prince, but also always sort of being judged by people as well. So all of that, I don't know. I just tried to make him feel like a real person, for better or for worse.
Wow. I have stars in my eyes because I'm like, I really like listening to how you talk about how you want to create his character, not just in these soap opera-y way. Because sometimes I'll imagine I think something's going to happen, but I'm thinking in the cliches and you take it a totally different direction, but it's actually better for the character.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I feel like even the book is out, but usually as an author, I don't get to talk about sort of all the things behind the curtain. So this is kind of fun. I'm like, wow, I get to actually talk about these characters that I've spent so long spending time with.
I guess that is the perfect segue into the last question in our plot and character side, which is, which character death did you have the most fun writing?
All the significant main character deaths were super hard to write. They were not fun. It was not fun to write Lon's death or Hilo's death or Maketar's death. Like those are all Rues' death. Oh god. So like they were not fun. They were necessary, but I wouldn't say I'd call them fun. The most fun death was the death of Mut Jr., that kid that Hilo captures in place of Barrow and buries alive. That was a fun death to write.
That one you're just like, wow, Hilo's unhinged. Hilo's just, I can't even defend this man.
I love the irony. I love the irony of that scene. It was so fun to write.
So iconic. Okay, moving on to some fun so-called quick questions, but it's okay. We can dive deeper into them too. Can you tell us more about the Jade Setter of John Loon novella?
Yeah, so it comes out April 30th. It is a standalone prequel novella. It is new characters, but you will see very familiar faces. Ait, Amada, Gaunt, Lon, Hilo all make appearances. So it is set before the events of Jade City. It was a lot of fun to write. It's a different view of John Loon and of the Green Bones. And it's kind of a noir mystery. So I have on occasion said that like if the Green Bones saga is Godfather-esque, this is like Chinatown.
Ooh, that's exciting. I can't wait to pick it up. We're going to need it a couple months down when we're like having withdrawal from this world.
Honestly, I wrote it because I was having withdrawal from the world. So it's, like when I got approached, so Subterranean Press, who's publishing it, they do these beautiful limited edition books. They also put it out in ebook. But they approached me and said, would you do a novella with us? And I said, can I do it in the Green Bone Saga world? And they're like, yes. And I was like, okay. So I was motivated by the fact that they always have just beautiful books, like physically beautiful covers and books. And then I got to play in the world more.
Oh my gosh, those are gonna sell like just like that. I tried to get the Poppy Wars Subterranean Press editions. They sold out in like 3 minutes. I was like, okay, not happening. But Fingers crossed
I
this
think
time around.
the print edition I think is already sold out, so it's gone.
Wow.
Heartbroken. Yeah, it's okay. When I saw the cover, I was
though,
like,
it's
this
still
is
out there.
so beautiful.
So another question we had was, what has been your favorite reader reaction to Jade Legacy so far? I think Hank Green also tweeted about it.
Oh yeah, yes. I mean, all the people asking for me to pay for therapy has been amusing. Like the number of therapy bills that are supposedly coming my way. But honestly, I think that I think the greatest reactions have been people who have said this is like my favorite trilogy or my favorite series, which is it's just mind blowing. There's so many books out there. There's so many, and you know, I felt very cognizant the whole time that I was writing Jade Legacy that I wanted to end strong. I wanted that sticking the landing was super important to me, and you know, for people to say that that was accomplished, and to say that you know, for people to say this is their favorite series, is just huge. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's an amazing feeling, and it feels like mission accomplished.
Yeah, Tiffany and I are in a group chat with another one of our friends, Brianna, aka Milky Booze. She was also part of our interview last time we had this discussion, and she finished Jade Legacy first amongst the three of us, and the first thing she tells us is she's like, I finished Jade Legacy. This is now my all-time favorite trilogy series ever. She's like, you have to read it immediately. We're like, we are reading it. We can't read any faster. And so yeah, just wanted to share.
Well, I am really glad to hear that, because you know, oftentimes you finish the series and then there's this sort of what now, like, but you know, it often is. It's easy to forget that like books live on, like they will hopefully continue to find readers, and like it would be amazing if 5 years from now, 10 years from now, people are still recommending it. I feel like that would be just really meaningful if it has that kind of longevity enough that people keep recommending it.
It definitely will. It definitely will.
Yeah. What are books that you're looking forward to in 2022?
Oh gosh. There's always like too many books to keep track of, and sometimes like they come out and I'm like, oh, that's coming out already. So I am, what's it called? Holly Black's first adult fantasy novel, Book of Night, is coming out this year, and I'm very interested to read that, because Holly Black has written some incredible young adult novels. My favorite vampire novel is The Coldest Girl in Cold Town. That's the title of it, right? Holly Black novel. And I am very interested to see what she does on the adult stage. And then I got an arc of Brian McClellan's new fantasy novel called In the Shadow of Lightning. And he's best known for the Powder Mage series, but it's like a brand new world, and it uses god glass, which is like this substance that like is running out. So like it really pushed all my buttons for like magic substance with a lot of like world-changing economic implications. And so I was fortunate to get an arc of that, and I'm looking forward to it coming out.
We'll add those to our TBR then. Another question we had was, how did you celebrate, or did you celebrate, after finished writing Jade Legacy?
I launched Jade Legacy at a time when we were kind of like doing hybrid stuff. So I was able to do a number of in-person conventions, and also I was doing the virtual book launch. So it was kind of a mix. But I thought, you know what? Normally I do a big book launch at Powell's, which is like the big local indie bookstore that takes up like an entire block here in Portland. And they've done all my previous launches, but they weren't doing book events in person at the time that Jade Legacy came out. So I thought I still have to celebrate this in some way. So I just rented out a room in a restaurant here and invited like all my writer friends, and we had like pizza and hang out, and it was really nice to get together with people and still make it like a celebration.
That sounds so special, and I'm really glad that you got to celebrate in person and like have that fun experience. Final question, what's next now that the Greenbow saga is wrapped up? Would you be interested in exploring other genres, or are you hoping to write another fantasy series?
I'm sure my editor would like the answer to this question as well. So I will definitely write in other genres, and specifically I have written science fiction before, and I'm eager to write more science fiction, so I will almost certainly write a science fiction story next. I have one that is in development, and I just need to, it's not public yet, but I'm working on it. And I also have an idea for a new fantasy series. So it's just a matter of like which of those I manage to finish first. But yes, excited about those. And then the novella, which will come out soon. There is also going to be another novella that I did that's completely separate, not Greenbone Saga, that comes out spring of 2023.
Ooh, so far from now.
I know.
I guess like another quick question, because we asked about this last year. We were wondering, do you have any more news about the adaptation? Someone asked, can you tell us anything you're excited to see come to life?
Oh gosh. So the development process proceeds in its it fits and starts as these things go. Hollywood adaptations are all, as you all know, like the development process can be very long. So right now where we're at is that there has been, it's in the script development stage. So there's been a pilot script written. There is an episode 2 that is written. It is gone to studio executives to read and await a decision on green lighting. So that's where we're at with that. Is there anything in particular that I'm super excited to see? I mean, I as the author, I don't have a lot of input or control into how the adaptation turns out. So I kind of have to be sort of circumspect about the whole thing and be like, I know it's going to be different. The adaptation is very often different from the source material. So it's not my necessarily like my vision is the books. And now someone else and other people get to like layer their vision and add their vision to it. And so even though it's different, though, what's most important to me is that it's true to the characters and to the story, like not the plot element, but kind of the vibe of the story, and it being a family saga. But what would be super cool is just to see the Jade disciplines depicted. Like that will just be like, what's perception going to look like? Like how do they show that visually? Or seeing them like fight with deflection and lightness, like that's just going to be cool. So I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be so cool to see.
Yes, martial art scenes with Jade and like powers and all that jazz. I'm super, super, super excited.
Well, those are all the questions that we have prepared. We're so thankful that you're able to join us. And again, all of us really enjoyed the book. So many of our book club members can't stop gushing about it and crying about it. We're really thankful. Do you have any like last messages you want to give?
Just thanks for coming on the journey. It's been a ride, and I've just been super touched by everyone who's reached out to me and told me how much they enjoyed it and sent me fan art, therapy bills. So thank you for having me on the show and for making it a book club pick.
Yay. Our February book of the month is The Jasmine Throne. We hope you can read with us. And in March, we're doing something a bit different where we're going to read I don't know what it originally was, but it was like a Chinese novel translated to like a webtoon. We're reading Heaven Official's Blessing.
Oh,
So that'll be exciting too. And then we'll come back out with more information for future books down the line.
awesome. My
Yeah, we're
daughter
so
loves
excited to read
that book.
So thank you, and we can't wait to see you all next time.
Yay! Thank
Take care.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.